I'm Heeth Grantham, and this is The Outsider. This is the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. It's on the border between Cape Elizabeth and Scarborough, Maine. This is a saltwater marsh. It's a unique blending of terrestrial, marine, and aquatic freshwater environments. Because you've got so many different types of environments mixed into one, it draws a tremendous diversity of animals. And also, if you're just out for a nice quiet paddle, the quiet little run here makes a beautiful place to go for a kayak. Down here, if you can see, we've got barnacles and mussels growing below the high water mark. So at high tide, these will be covered with water. But then right next to it is a floating crabapple, a distinctly terrestrial form of life. Also down here, in fact, is a little dead green crab. And we can see that this guy is a male. This is a little boy crab. You can tell by the shape of the tail. That little triangular piece there is actually his tail that's folded up underneath his body. It looks triangular, a little bit like the Washington Monument. If it looked like the Capitol building, more rounded, then we would know that this little fella is actually a girl. So this aerial dogfight we've been watching is a great example of predation in action. It's a little bit unusual to see a raptor working this hard to get him or herself lunch. That's an awful lot of energy to be wasting. But don't be mistaken, there is that sort of life and death action going on all over this marsh, all day long, every day. It's just not quite as visible because the scale of the action is not as high, and a lot of it goes on underneath the water. So one of the things we're going to be doing today is looking for more interactions between predator and prey like that as we go for our paddle. One of the things that's definitely out of place around here is this bank of rock. This has all been put here in order to stop this bank from eroding. Gives you a good idea of how high the water level comes during spring tides, flood tides, or storms. The tide is flooding. Coming in right now. Maybe a knot or two worth of current that I'm working against right now, and it's a little bit of work. But the nice thing about paddling in a salt marsh is that you can almost always find eddies. They're almost like shadows of the current. Behind obstacles, behind bends in the river, will be some calm water spots where you can stop in and rest. And they have benefits aside from just for the paddler. For fish like striped bass, these eddy areas form a great feeding area because small animals tend to get mixed up into the turbulence and they get caught. And so areas like this in the river tend to be feeding stations for larger predators. Activity below the surface and calm above on the surface for us paddlers. This is smooth cordgrass. This is one of the two basic types of vegetation that makes the salt marsh look the way it does to us. The other is meadow saltgrass. And the real big difference between the two types of grass is where they live. The smooth cordgrass lives at low elevations where it gets flooded by the high tides on a regular basis. The meadow saltgrass lives at higher elevations where it's not nearly so susceptible to being inundated by that brackish water all the time. High tide. The moon passing overhead has dragged all this water in here. The mud banks that we saw earlier are now submerged. And animals who were hiding back at low tide are now out on the bottom and in the water column feeding. The periwinkles that we saw earlier, they were closed up, locked up, keeping their moisture inside. They are now running, well, for a snail running around the bottom, feeding away on algae. There'll be whelks, predatory snails, chasing the periwinkles. There are young fish, larval insects, shrimps, small crabs, other crustaceans, feeding on the detritus, the plant material that has come both down from the watershed from inland and also feeding on algae and that sort of thing that have been broken up and have flowed in from the ocean. This is now a smorgasbord. There is a ton of activity going on under these boats, and it's just too bad we can't see it all. Well, as you can probably see from the grasses around me and from the riffles on the surface behind me, the breeze, she freshens. The afternoon wind is coming up, and after a good afternoon of fighting the tide, going out towards the ocean, and now fighting the wind as well, I think I'm ready to turn around and head for home. Back. What a perfect way to enjoy a fall afternoon. We saw the rise of the tide. We were here for peregrine falcon and red-tailed hawk, I think. Gulls, cormorants, murder of crows all over the place. All sorts of animals. And just 20 minutes from Portland. So come check out the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge.